The Black Death, one of history's most terrifying plagues, swept across Europe, Asia, and North Africa in the mid-14th century, leaving death and destruction in its wake. It wasn't just a disease, it was an unstoppable force that erased millions of lives, shattered societies, and altered the course of history. To live through the Black Death was to live in a waking nightmare, where the line between life and death blurred with each passing day. It wasn't a question of if it would strike, it was when. And when it did, few survived its brutal grip. Those who did were left haunted, forever changed by the devastation around them. The plague became an unwelcome equalizer, sparing no one and reshaping the destiny of the world. The plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, originated in Central Asia and made its way westward along the bustling trade routes of the Silk Road. It traveled silently at first, hitching rides on fleas and black rats aboard ships and caravans, spreading through crowded ports and towns. By the time it reached Europe in 1347, it had evolved into a ruthless killer, fueled by the cramped and unsanitary living conditions of the time, as well as a lack of medical knowledge about its causes and transmission. The plague initially struck port cities like Messina and Genoa, brought by infected sailors and merchants, before rapidly spreading inland through trade routes and crowded settlements. The symptoms alone were enough to strike terror into the hearts of even the bravest. Victims first experienced high fever, chills, and exhaustion. Then came the buboes, large blackened swellings that appeared in the armpits, groin, and neck, filled with pus and excruciatingly painful. Vomiting, delirium, and internal bleeding soon followed, and within 3 to 5 days, death claimed its victim. For many, the disease was so swift that it left no time to say goodbye, stealing lives before their loved ones could even comprehend the loss. The Black Death did not merely traverse regions, it embedded itself in every aspect of life. Entire towns were decimated, their bustling markets and streets reduced to eerie silence. Those who escaped its grip often unknowingly carried the contagion to new places, sparking fresh outbreaks and intensifying the cycle of death and despair. For the average citizen, life during the Black Death was marked by fear and hopelessness. One day your neighbor might be alive and well, and the next, their entire family would be dead, their bodies left to rot as no one dared approach. Streets once filled with laughter and trade became eerily silent, save for the haunting creak of death carts carrying the bloated corpses of the fallen. The air itself seemed poisoned, thick with the stench of decay and smoke from burned bodies. People fled their homes in desperation, only to unknowingly carry the plague with them to the next town. Entire villages were wiped out, leaving fields untended and homes abandoned. Those who survived lived in constant terror, knowing their turn could come at any moment, unable to escape the invisible enemy that stalked their lives. Doctors were powerless against the plague, armed only with bizarre remedies and superstition. These remedies, though ineffective, were often embraced with desperate hope, reflecting the sheer terror and helplessness of the times. They prescribed treatments like bloodletting, consuming crushed emeralds, or applying mixtures of onions and vinegar to buboes, all in desperate attempts to cure the afflicted. They wore long-beaked masks filled with aromatic herbs, believing the scent would ward off the disease. They burned incense and carried flowers, hoping to purify the air. Yet the plague moved relentlessly, ignoring these futile efforts. Without understanding the true cause, infected fleas and the bacteria they carried, medical interventions were nothing more than desperate guesswork. Priests, too, were overwhelmed. Many refused to visit the sick or perform last rites for fear of contracting the disease themselves. For the faithful, it felt as though God had abandoned them, leaving their prayers unanswered and their communities in ruin. Desperation fueled chaos. People searched for scapegoats, blaming Jews, foreigners, and even witches for bringing the plague. Violent pogroms erupted, with innocent communities tortured and slaughtered in attempts to appease divine wrath or stop the spread. Flagellants roamed from town to town, whipping themselves in public displays of penance, hoping to earn God's mercy. Others, convinced that the end of the world had arrived, turned to hedonism, hosting wild feasts and orgies to embrace pleasure before death claimed them. Amid the despair, society fractured further, with trust in neighbors, leaders, and institutions crumbling under the weight of fear. The psychological toll was immense. Survivors were left haunted by the sheer scale of death, the eerie silence of once bustling towns, and the constant presence of decay. The world seemed darker, smaller, and crueler. The idea of a just and benevolent God was questioned as the faithful grappled with the seeming randomness of the plague's destruction. Art and literature began to reflect this existential despair, with macabre themes of death and mortality becoming prevalent in works of the time. Skeletal imagery, dance macabre scenes, and grim reflections on the fragility of life dominated cultural expressions, serving as both a reminder and a coping mechanism for the collective trauma. The economic and social impact of the Black Death was equally catastrophic. With up to 50% of Europe's population dead, an estimated 25–50 million people, entire systems collapsed. Farms were abandoned, leading to food shortages and famine. Labor shortages gave survivors newfound bargaining power, challenging the rigid hierarchies of feudalism. The once dominant Catholic Church saw its authority shaken as it failed to protect its flock. Trust in institutions eroded, leaving a fractured and fragile society in the wake of the plague. For those who lived through it, the plague was not just a catastrophe, it was a turning point that would reshape the very fabric of their world. Yet, even in the face of unimaginable horror, humanity endured. As the plague subsided, survivors began to rebuild. The labor shortages that crippled feudal estates also empowered workers, allowing them to demand better wages and conditions. This shift would sow the seeds of economic and social transformation, eventually leading to the decline of feudalism and the rise of a more modern Europe. The plague also forced advancements in medicine and public health. While understanding of disease transmission remained limited, the need for quarantine measures and sanitary practices began to take root, planting the seeds for more organized approaches to health crises in the future. The Black Death serves as a chilling reminder of humanity's vulnerability to nature's wrath. It exposed the fragility of society, the limits of human knowledge, and the darkness that can emerge in times of fear. Yet, it also highlighted the resilience of the human spirit. In the face of despair, people found ways to survive, adapt, and rebuild. The world that emerged from the ashes of the plague was forever changed, a testament to both the destructive power of the disease and the enduring strength of those who lived through it. The lessons learned from this harrowing chapter in history continue to echo through the ages, reminding us of the delicate balance between human achievement and the unpredictable forces of nature. Let the story of the Black Death be a sobering lesson and a source of strength. While the plague's horrors may feel distant, they remind us that life's fragility makes it all the more precious. As terrifying as the Black Death was, it also teaches us the importance of gratitude, resilience, and the unbreakable will to endure. It is a story of both devastation and recovery, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, humanity can rise again. Let it inspire us to cherish the moments we have, to act with compassion, and to build a future rooted in both humility and hope.